All right, hi everyone. I spent a pretty decent chunk of this month so far working on non-exciting, non-visual effecty stuff in Blender, and instead sitting down staring at screens in the studio for ages as I'm refining my personal render farm. So by the time this video comes out, I should have released a short on this channel called Oh Suzanne. If you haven't watched it, go and watch it now. It should be a 5120 by 2160 resolution ultra wide, 30 frames per second, which is quite a large resolution. And there are 8 shots that have been spliced up a little bit. 7 of the shots were rendered here in the studio, and 1 of the shots was rendered with Superluminal, an online render farm. So I did this as a data gathering exercise, and also to make notes on what kind of resolutions I should be using for, like, you know, full-on productions or just social posts, and how the proportion of time required to do the rendering changes depending on what the settings are. And also one thing I've done is I've updated my startup file again. So you may know that recently I did a video already talking about some updates to my startup file, but I'm just making continuous changes to it as I'm learning things from my workflow. So there's a new version, 5.1.1 RF. I call it RF for render farm. What it does is it adds a new workspace here called scripts/parameters. And this is a new window that helps me to quickly swap render settings and make sure I'm ensuring a standard for myself. So what we see is there's a text file here called data parameters. Do not change the name because it's accessed by script. We have image sheet and movie modes. So in a recent video, you may have heard me explain how one of the things I'm doing now to keep myself interested in the short making process is I render out extremely low resolution clips of the shots I make in Blender that effectively act like editing proxies, except they're not technically proxies because the full data doesn't actually exist, so they're not generated from full data. It's closer to a previs than a proxy, technically. So I do like a 20 or 30% resolution and maybe a quarter sample to get a blurry output that you can still see detail in the scene. Like you can see how the shaders look, etc. So it's not like a viewport render out where you won't get any information on the shaders. And generally I can get like 1 or 2 or 3 frames per second while doing that from cycles. So down here I've got 2 scripts, S-movie 30% and S-movie 20%. And if I click on any one of these, what it will do is it will automatically set all the output settings, which you can see here. It does several things. It will set the samples to where they should be. It won't actually set the resolution. It will set the resolution percentage down to 30. And it will also change the output file name as well to whatever the active camera is. So basically I can click between these different scripts to set myself to the different workflows that I've settled on. So obviously the bottom 2 here are the movie ones, 30 and 20%. And then the image workflow ones here are for, again, image sheet outputs. So when we're rendering individual frames as things like PNGs, and you can set the format up here as well by text. So whatever we've written down here in these parameters, these template scripts are going to read from. Now, this just saves me from having to go and manually, modify all the values individually every time. I could just say, look, hey, here for my project, this is the resolution I'm aiming for. This is the frame rate I'm aiming for, my samples, and the format I want to export to in the image workflow. So whenever I click to apply these scripts, it's going to apply all of these, but just change the percentage. Now you might think, okay, well, if I'm doing lower res outputs just for the movie workflow, then when it comes to doing the final images, why do I have multiple percentages for multiple resolutions? Why would you want to do a lower resolution final image output? Doesn't really make sense. Well, it actually kind of does make sense because I've made a little bit of a discovery or a decision for myself. And I put some extra information about this on the Patreon Project Fold June production files because the post is exclusive. By the way, the Oh Suzanne short file is also on that post. So if you want to get access to that, that's $5 tier on Patreon. So on that production post, I put a little screenshot of a spreadsheet because what I did was I made some notes on the amount of time it took to render a single frame and to render out one of the 8 shots, which are about 400 frames each, with the exception of one, which was shorter, 200 samples each. And when comparing the rendering time for the different resolutions, I found that I could reduce it from 5120 by 2160 down to 3840 by 1620. So that's 75% of the original resolution without really losing visual quality when seen from my kind of 4K screen. However, without losing such an amount that I would even care. So as well as taking objective measurements about time and cost, I also kind of took subjective measurements. How much do I care about the pixels visually between these percentages? So for me, what I kind of discovered was that though 5120 by 2160 is like the target, for most shots, I probably don't need to render out the full target amount. down. And I've had a kind of similar revelation about frame rate as well, because when I'm kind of editing things in DaVinci Resolve now, my actual editing workspace is set up for 60 frames a second. So when you're watching things back on YouTube, unless I make changes to this, it will say 60 frames per second in the settings. And people might not like that because maybe it requires more bandwidth. But for me, the way I'm thinking about it is my workspace should support the full target range for anything I want to achieve. Even if I am rendering to a lower resolution and a lower frame rate, what it does is it gives me space to expand and contract, right? So if you want to do anything funky, like, the Spider-Verse animations where you're kind of having things like an interlaced frame rate almost, or kind of some going slower or faster and then lining up at certain times, you have the space to move and flex within the workspace without having to like reconvert speeds and frame rates afterwards for individual clips. So that's one way I'm thinking about it now, is I've got a target of 5120 by 2160, but with my workflow now in Blender, I'm setting up so I can have presets that help me step between different modes on that process depending on the importance of the shot and what the output's going to be. So while the target is high, the actual thing that I may end up kind of rendering for the majority of the content was probably just going to be a 3840 by 1620 resolution at 30 frames per second, which is lower than what the workspace can support. Generally speaking, this computer can do about 1 frame per minute, depending on the actual scene. For that's again at the 200 sample benchmark Suzanne file. The other workers in the render farm will do that at different rates. Another interesting conclusion I came to, again, I mentioned it briefly on the Patreon post, is that it is far more economical rendering shots here locally than it is online with an online render farm like Superluminal. Not sponsored, by the way, but I have been speaking to them. They did offer me free credits, but I did not take that offer. If you're watching, by the way, the two of you, Odin offered me the credits just in case Jonas gets confused. So I didn't go back and ask them to give me the credits because I actually wanted to find out how much it would cost me. So again, 8 shots. One of the shots took about 1.5 hours. So that's 1 hour, 34 minutes to render on Superluminal, and it cost $23.20 for a single shot, which is expensive. So 1.5 hours, $23. Here in the studio, it would take between 3 to 6 hours to do the same shot. That's quite a wide range because my measuring for time has not been particularly accurate. I keep forgetting to start like an actual timer. But it's about 3 to 6 hours and it costs nothing more than the electricity bill. But in theory, if we just kind of applied that a bit more, so 23.20 times 8 would be $185.6 for that little Oh Suzanne short, which is quite pricey from my reckoning anyway, because it's a very short short. So it's much more economical doing the renders from here. It also goes to show how good this render farm already is, even though it's quite a basic one, because Superluminal being like a really efficient render farm online with like 10 nodes spends 1.5 hours doing the shot compared to 3 to 6 hours here. That's not much of a difference. And I've just got like a crummy laptop, my old audiovisual computer, a gaming laptop in a studio, and this computer sometimes running it. To be honest, I was expecting Superluminal to be much faster, but it was super easy to use and it was fun watching it like render. So it was more expensive than I expected and slower than I expected for a render farm. However, I really like the people behind it and I will continue to use it if I need to for rush jobs. Another little discovery I made is that render farms for me seem to only be a sensible idea for heavier projects, like heavier bulk content, like the full resolutions 5120 by 2160. Now, the reason I say that is because when you're like scaling down, so if we were doing 25% resolutions, which would be 1280 by 540, the estimated time it would take to do one of those shots here in the local studio would be between 12 and 26 minutes, which is like no time at all. And the estimated time to do that on Superluminal would be about 7 minutes. So for me, if I'm looking at 7 minutes compared to 12 to 26 minutes, there's no point. Like if I used a bathroom and come back, they would both be done. So there'd be no point doing that on an online render farm. So from my perspective, having my own farm locally, the purpose for me to use an online render farm is to throw money at a problem to speed it up, which I guess is the point of a render farm anyway. But I mean, has anyone ever played like the Civilization games or Humankind or Endless Legend, these kind of city builder games? And you can put like a building into production on a city and it will take like 6 turns to complete or something. In some of these games, you can pay a one-off fee to have the like building complete immediately. So you can throw money at a problem to speed it up. And that's kind of how I'm thinking about it here. I've got my own render farm. It may take 6 turns or 6 hours to do the shot. But if I'm thinking, oh, I really need to speed up, I can throw that file at the render farm just to get a quick boost on it. But for me, it seems like none of that is really necessary. I've also been sort of designing my render farm in a way that is gearing towards a swarm system where every worker is also a manager, if possible. It's not completely there yet, but it's getting there. For example, I'm building it around like the Windows shared folder system, which is actually fantastic. When I first mentioned this to people, they were like, oh, you should use other methods, just use Linux, blah, 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 blah. Shut up, don't say that, I don't care. I'm having a lot of fun with the Windows system. This house has quite a large floor plan and the Wi-Fi stretches all over. So I could literally sit by the pool on a little laptop or like Surface or something and watch the rendering, access the files, move stuff back and forth from anywhere. It's fantastic. But I've set it up in a way where every worker has like helper scripts, the ability to pull the rendered frames from every other worker to them in one go. So if I'm working on any particular one, any one of them can pull all the results to it immediately. So in this way, it's quite agnostic. Every worker is a production space and can be the manager for the rendering as well. The only difficulty there is the IP address will change. So for now, I would have to manually re-enter the IP address into the Flamenco add-on to get it to point to the right place. But I could literally go into Flamenco and rewrite the code slightly to automatically update the address to whatever one is the manager. But I haven't quite done that yet. So I'm using Flamenco as not the entire render farm because it's not really compatible with my Windows shared folder space system. I bumped into a lot of issues with Flamenco. I can't remember what all of them were, but I did resolve them, some custom configs and other settings. So Flamenco is really only being used to track the progress for the shots and to distribute the files and the frames to each node. After it's done, the frames are disparate and disconnected and they're just sitting on the different workers. That's when I use my scripts to pull them all to one place. Flamenco does this thing where it tries to build like a video preview at the end of the shot being complete, but it's quite funny because it will fail to do that because the frames don't all sit in one place. So you get this really weird choppy video that it produces that I just delete and discard afterwards because I don't need it. So there's still work to do, but it's going okay. Like I said, I'm finding I can pretty much half the rendering time-ish just by going to 75% resolution, 3840 by 1620 for ultra wide. And I'm kind of settling on decisions about how and when to use render farms and how economical they are. And I'm leaning much more on the side of do as much as I can and or everything right here. But you know, I do have other things to test. I've got more workflow testing on my movie workflow to test. I've also got Eevee to test because I've been cycles focused. I figure go big or go home, do the tests on the large resolution ultra wide. Could have done 60 frames, but that's a little bit too much. I'm not really aiming for 60 for the shorts anyway, even though I've got the workspace set up there in case I need to do something like a cool effect that really pushes the frame rate. So go big or go home, optimize for cycles, because in theory, if doing anything with Eevee, it'll just be like that. It'll be like, how fast can your render farm produce an Eevee short? Yes. So yeah, like I said, the startup file has been updated on Gumroad and Patreon because you can access my Blender startup files on Patreon on the $10 tier because that's a product access thing. Separately from that, the Oh Suzanne short file is on the $5 tier under the June production files, and there's a bit more information about my render farm process on that actual June production file post. So yeah, thanks for watching everyone. If you made it to the end, put a unicorn emoji in the comments because that's our brand emoji here. Oh, did I ever show you? Hang on. I'm sure I mentioned this once or twice, but on my Apple Pencil, you know how you can get like the emoji engraved? Hang on. Yes. Obviously not sponsored. Other tablet providers are available, but put the unicorn in the comments. If you're on Windows, you can press the Windows key and the period key to open an emoji keyboard. That's how you can find unicorn. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.